Today we'll be taking a look at the 2024 Senate map based on current polling averages in every single race. Democrats are especially vulnerable in seats they hold in Montana, Nevada, Arizona, Ohio, West Virginia, and even Maryland. And as of right now, Republicans are guaranteed to win West Virginia and are actually leading in the state of Maryland. And so in this video, we're going to take a look at what the balance of power will look like in the upper chamber of Congress after the 2024 Senate elections. We'll begin with the West Coast and move our way eastward, starting off with Washington, where incumbent Democratic Senator Maria Cantwell is running for re-election and leads by 15 points on average. This is going to be a solid blue state. California will be the same. Adam Schiff is the Democratic nominee, with Steve Garvey as the Republican, and not officially nominated by their parties. In California, the top two candidates of any party in the primary are the two candidates in the general election, and so since Schiff and Garvey ended up the top two, they will face off against each other, and the election is made much easier for Adam Schiff, who currently serves in the House of Representatives, because he is running against a Republican and not another fellow Democrat, like we saw in 2018 when Dianne Feinstein won her re-election against Kevin DeLeon, who was another Democrat. And so as a result, Adam Schiff leads by 20 points in the polling average. He is going to win his 6-year term in the Senate. Moving on to our first two competitive seats in Nevada and Arizona. In the Silver State, we have an election between Sam Brown and Jackie Rosen. Rosen is the incumbent Democrat who has served in the upper chamber of Congress since she won her seat in 2018 against incumbent Dean Heller in a relatively close election. This time around, Jackie Rosen leads by 4.6 percentage points in the polling average. However, according to the latest New York Times poll, it is actually a tie between the two candidates. So the race in Nevada can get very competitive, and if Democrats don't win this seat, they have no chance at retaining their Senate majority. But for right now, Nevada is going to be lean Democratic. In Arizona, Democrats lead here as well. We have a matchup between Ruben Gallego and Kari Lake. This is going to be one of the most closely watched elections of the cycle. According to the polls, Ruben Gallego is currently winning by 6.6 percentage points. Kari Lake is a former TV anchor in Arizona. Ruben Gallego currently serves in the House. And Kyrsten Sinema, who was elected as a Democrat in 2018, since became an independent, and she simply isn't popular enough to actually win, so she will not be running in this election, which is why we have both a new Democratic and Republican candidate. Kari Lake is a shoo-in for the GOP nomination. She ran in the governor's election in 2022, where she lost to Katie Hobbs, who honestly wasn't that great of a candidate, and that was an election that Lake was widely expected to win. Kari Lake honestly is not the best nominee for Republicans in a race like this. Arizona currently has two senators that were elected as Democrats, and currently Ruben Gallego is on track to winning this race by a likely margin. Moving up to Montana, this is going to be another must-win state for Democrats, although the issue here is that it is going to be very difficult for the Democratic Party to actually win this race. According to the latest polls, Jon Tester does lead by 5 points, but these are some pretty outdated polls. Tim Sheehy has become the Republican nominee in this race. He's endorsed by Trump, and this is a state that Trump won by a solid 16-point margin in the 2020 election. Jon Tester only leads by 2% according to that most recent Emerson College poll, so no matter what, this is going to be very close. In 2018, which was a blue wave year, Jon Tester was able to barely fend off a challenge from Matt Rosendale. Now in 2024, there's absolutely no sign of there being a blue wave. If there's any wave, it is going to be a red wave. And so Jon Tester right now is in a very vulnerable position, although the polling that we do have, which is quite outdated, does show him leading by a likely margin. Now, the remaining races here in the middle of the country are all going to be pretty solid. In Utah, Mitt Romney is retiring, but we will see a Republican replace him. Republicans in these remaining races as well, while in New Mexico, Martin Heinrich, the incumbent Democrat, is expected to win his re-election. Before we continue, only 10% of you guys are actually subscribed, so take the time right now to subscribe for more content like this leading up to the election in November. Down in Texas, we have an election that was pretty close last time around in 2018. Now we have Ted Cruz versus Colin Allred. Beto O'Rourke is not running in this election because what we saw 6 years ago was O'Rourke come within 3 points of winning a Senate seat in the Lone Star State. Today, however, Cruz leads by a pretty comfortable 8.2% margin. Colin Allred is not going to win. That is simply a fact. It is going to be Ted Cruz who will be reelected to a third term. He's not too popular. He's not well liked in general, but he is still a Republican in Texas, and he is going to win his reelection by a likely margin. Hawaii, Mazie Hirono is running for reelection. She's easily going to win. And now moving on to the Midwest, we have quite a few important races here. In Minnesota, Amy Klobuchar is going to be running. She's been serving in the Senate since the early 2000s, and she leads by a solid margin. There's no beating her. She won her last term by 24 points. So Minnesota will be solid blue. Wisconsin, Democrats are doing relatively well here as well, as they do have another incumbent, Tammy Baldwin. This time, she leads by 7.7%. She's up by 12, according to the 2 most recent polls. This is not a state that Republicans are targeting. This is by no means a state that Republicans even need to be remotely competitive in, as we do have an incumbent, and Tammy Baldwin is quite popular, so she is on track to winning her re-election in Wisconsin. Michigan, though, is going to be quite a bit closer, as we no longer have an incumbent. Debbie Stabenow is stepping down. She will not be running for re-election, and so instead Alyssa Slotkin is going to be the Democratic nominee. She currently serves in the House, while Mike Rogers, who is a former representative, will be the Republican in this race. Slotkin currently leads by just over 1%. This race can definitely get competitive. We saw in 2020 when Joe Biden won his first term in office that Gary Peters' Senate election in Michigan was very close, even though Peters was the incumbent Democrat, and this race wasn't really expected to be too competitive. It ended up being a lot closer than many other races. It was actually the closest race outside of Georgia. And so the race in Michigan right now is going to be lean Democratic, although this is definitely one to watch. Indiana, though, is going to be solid red, while in Ohio, Sherrod Brown is running for a 4th term in office, and he really does have to win his election. He leads by 5 points in the polls against Bernie Moreno. Moreno honestly was not the best choice of nominee for this race, although even if Republicans lose it, they can still easily win back Senate control. But as of right now, Sherrod Brown does have the advantage in the polling, although it is slightly outdated with the most recent poll coming out in March. So the state of Ohio, the Buckeye State, is going to be lean in favor, or likely in favor of the Democrats. Pennsylvania is actually right now closer than Ohio, according to the polling. Bob Casey leads by just 4.9 percentage points over David McCormick, even though he won his last race by 13 points. The Keystone State is probably going to get pretty competitive this November, mainly because David McCormick is a pretty strong candidate. He ran for Senate in 2022. He lost the Republican nomination to Mehmet Oz in an election where Democrat John Fetterman eventually came out on top. With all the issues that Fetterman had with his health, if David McCormick was the Republican nominee, he probably could have won. And so now that he's running against Bob Casey, who is a significantly stronger candidate, it is still more likely that Casey comes out on top, but David McCormick can definitely make this race interesting. Pennsylvania is going to be lean Democratic. Wisconsin is going to be solid red. Joe Manchin is not running for re-election, which means that Democrats essentially have no chance at holding on to this seat. Manchin was able to scrape by with a 3.2% victory 6 years ago. He has since said that he will be retiring, and so with Jim Justice as the Republican nominee, he's the very popular governor of West Virginia. He is absolutely going to win this seat, and this is going to be a flip in favor of the GOP. Virginia, on the other hand, is going to be solid blue. Tim Kaine is running for re-election. The margin might not be solid, but there's no doubt that Kaine will win this race. And in Maryland, we have a competitive race here as well, with Larry Hogan running against Angela Alsobrooks. Hogan is the former governor of Maryland. He was a Republican. He was pretty popular. However, the Senate race is going to be different because it will have national implications, which is why this race is going to be pretty close no matter who wins. The most recent poll does have Alsobrooks ahead, but in the polling average, Larry Hogan leads by nearly 7 points. We're just going to have to wait and see how this race develops, but for right now, Larry Hogan is in a pretty good spot. The race is going to be likely Republican. And for basically every other race up here in the Northeast, we're going to see a Democratic or Democratic caucusing independent win their re-election. All incumbents here, Vermont and Maine, we have Bernie Sanders and Angus King, who are independents that caucus with the Democrats. Now, in New Jersey, this is really the only remaining race of interest in the Northeast, because Bob Menendez, who is very unpopular, has actually filed paperwork to run. He won re-election in 2018 as the Democrat, but he's since become an independent in this election, and he is not going to win the Democratic nominee, as Andy Kim is already the nominee and Curtis Bashaw is the Republican. Now, Bob Menendez has been caught up in a bribery scandal. He has no chance of winning, but for some reason he is still running. This may hurt Democrats, as Andy Kim only leads by 6 points in this three-way poll, but nonetheless, it is a race that heavily favors the Democrats no matter what, even if Menendez tries to play spoiler. And now to finish off the map with the 4 remaining races we have here in the South. In Missouri, Claire McCaskill lost her seat to Josh Hawley in 2018. Hawley is now the incumbent, and he leads by solid 13-14 point margins against Lucas Kunce, who's going to be the Democratic nominee. Missouri will be solid red. Tennessee will be solid as well, where Marsha Blackburn leads by 18 points. In Mississippi, Roger Wicker is going to win by a solid margin as well. And finally, in Florida, Rick Scott, who won his first election in 2018, defeating Bill Nelson, who is actually the incumbent Democrat running for a 4th term. This was the closest election of the cycle, and it was a surprise that Scott actually came out on top. And according to the polling now in 2024, Scott is easily going to win. Florida is now a red state. He leads by 11 points. The state of Florida is going to be likely Republican. And so based on current polling averages, Republicans are on track to winning the 2024 Senate with 51 seats at least, with the Democrats' 49. New data in Ohio, Montana, and Nevada may prove otherwise. Republicans may expand their majority even further. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you subscribe right now if you want content like this leading up to the election in November.